In this quick tip, I'd like to talk about shading and lighting transparent objects whenever you have a backdrop that's kind of blending in with that object. This scenario, by the way, is very common to run across whenever you have product shots that feature glass, ice, or anything else that's transparent. Before we get there, though, make sure to check out Houdini for the new artists too if you enjoy this video. You'll find all kinds of exercises, tips, and tricks that are really similar to what we're about to do in this video. So if you enjoy challenges like this, then be sure to visit cgforge.com. Getting back to our scene now, here's the challenge that I want you to think about. How do you make the swan here not blend in with the cloth backdrop? If you had a client and this is a product shot for an ice sculpture, we need that product to stand out and not blend in to its surroundings. So just using lighting tricks, how would you do that? Go ahead and pause this video and think about a few things in your head before I show you how I go about this situation. Let's start off by asking ourselves a question. When it comes to transparent objects, what are we actually looking at? Yes, I mean we're looking at a transparent object, but when it comes to the visual components of that, we can break this all down into a few things. We have the areas that are being shown behind the object. Let's say that this is the red section. So we see whatever's behind the transparent object. We also see highlights. So we see reflections, and we'll just call this highlights. Okay, so we see that. And then we also sometimes, depending on the ice and depending on how it's shaded, we're going to see some kind of diffuse contribution. So in this case, with our ice, we really don't see a lot of that, but if there's any scratches or rough areas, sometimes you're going to see a little bit of a diffuse light. And this essentially is similar to having a roughness slider that's up on the ice, or if you actually have dirt on it, something like that. For the most part, though, we really see two things. We see whatever's behind the object, and then we also see the highlights. And anytime you want to light something with a transparent object, these are the two main things that you need to account for. So, with that in mind, what happens when I turn off this cloth backdrop? Let's take a look. Now, as we can see, it's a lot easier to see this swan. It's not as difficult to pick out various things about it because when we zoom in here, the objects that are behind the swan are creating these darker areas. If we compare that to just the white cloth, this all blends in. There's not a lot of variety to the portion that is seeing through the object. So when we do this, the ice looks pretty awesome because it's picking up the HDRI. When this is happening, we pick up the object and we lose a lot of that complexity. So the first thing that I would try doing in this situation is use some kind of light linking, or perhaps use some kind of object settings to tell the transparent object to ignore the cloth backdrop. In other words, if I can tell the ice here to ignore what's behind it and instead pick up the HDRI, I bet you it's going to make this look a lot better. Let's see if that is the case. I'll go here to the backdrop geo, that's our cloth, turn that on, and then I want to go to the Redshift OBJ tab, visibility, and I want to turn off visible in refractions. So let's do that to start things off and see what happens. Okay, and it looks like we're on the right track here, but it's still not really showing me the colors that I saw before in the HDRI. We just have these dark zones. The reason for that is because we're still casting shadows onto the swan. So if I also go to our cloth backdrop and I say, don't cast any shadows, we can see that we are back to seeing exactly what we saw when we had our HDRI. If we compare this to that, it's the same thing. And now, if we zoom out, this looks a lot better. We can really actually see this a lot more cleanly. We went from this to that, which makes a big difference in what we're trying to do here. But let's say now I want to make this contrast a little bit even more exaggerated. I want the dark areas of the swan to go darker without affecting the backdrop. So what I'll do for that is I'm going to make a copy of our HDR, and I'll make one HDR for the cloth and the other HDR just for the swan. I then have control over the different exposures, and that will allow me to, let's say, turn down the lighting and the refractions while leaving the cloth the same. So I'll call this our HDRI cloth, and then we'll call the other one our HDRI swan. Here on the Objects tab, this is where we can do light linking. Turn that on. And what I want to say here is that this light is only enabled for our backdrop. So we'll go here, drag over the backdrop, and then for our swan, I can then go to our Objects tab, enable the Light Mesh Association, and light is available for star. That means everything except for, that's the uptick, so Shift 6, backdrop underscore geo. So now this guy will control the swan, that guy will control the cloth. Let's go ahead and press play again. We're back to where we were before, but now on the swan, I'm going to go to our exposure here and turn this down. And as we can see, that also will allow us to darken the ice and give us some control over getting this to stand out against the backdrop. Another thing that we might want to consider is just turning the backdrop down relative to the cloth. So if I turn the exposure down on that backdrop, let's say I turn this down to a value of 1, now the swan is going to be the brighter object that's in front of it. Now, right now the backdrop is a little bit too dark. We can see that HDRI coming through it. But then once I have this darker cloth, I can add in some other lights to pull out bright areas. And, well, the bottom line is that the brighter object is in front of the darker object. In other words, it feels like it's going towards the viewer because it's brighter, and the darker areas feel like it's going back into the frame. And that is beginning to get us a bit of layering, is what they call that. So I'm going to set our exposure here to 1.5 on the backdrop, and then maybe push it a tad bit on the swan, 3.5. So that we, again, just bring this up in general until this as a whole is standing out compared to the backdrop. Now we can actually see that silhouette as well. If we compare this to that, we can really see everything begin to feel like it's in front, as well as distinguish that silhouette more easily. I'm going to create a light for our backdrop as well as a light for our swan. And I want to separate them out so that I have control. So RS light, and I'm going to set this to an area light. Take the intensity down to 1 to start. And then here in our viewport, I'm going to start with the backdrop. I'll bring this up, rotate it about 90 degrees, bring it up. And in my mind, I want to bring out the surface qualities of this cloth. I want these wrinkles to really show up in the cloth, and I don't want to flatten that out. So in order to bring out that detail, I'm going to try to skim the surface. And I'll take this diagonal angle going down as well. So I'm going to do that kind of thing. Just diagonally skim the surface and hopefully hit these areas that bring out the shape. On our lights, I'm going to turn up the shape size so we have something a bit more like that. And the other thing that I want to do is add a gobo, because just about every single area light can benefit greatly by putting in some kind of gobo. In this case, we're working with some kind of forest scene, so I figure something like this, or perhaps even something like that, could be good candidates for a gobo. We'll just have to plug this in and see what we like. All right, and as we turn up this exposure, we can see that eventually we're lighting up the whole thing. But we're also not getting a lot of detail. It's just kind of making everything flat now. So what I want to do is go to our spread parameter. if we go down here and we turn down the spread to 0, now we really start seeing that gobo shine through. And this is exactly the kind of thing that I was hoping for, because if we have these lines, if it looks like there's trees, that's going to add some detail. However, the angle isn't quite right yet. I'm going to bring it over and try to hit a bit more of this cloth. So whenever I want to do that, I like to create two views over here, split left and right. This guy is going to be our scene view, and the other guy is going to be our actual render view. And as we do this, I will take my face and move it down here so we can see this all happen at the same time. Okay, so playing this, I'll then go over to my light and just rotate it until I have the shapes that I like over here. I don't want it flat like this. I want to, again, emphasize the shapes, but I don't want to go too far where you really can't see a lot of that happening. So probably right around here is what I'm looking for. I'll also take this over in the X direction, maybe rotate it a little bit closer to the cloth. We don't want to go too crazy with that. And then I'll also take up the size just to cover more areas until we have this. Now in the objects, I'm going to enable that and only affect the backdrop with this light. So there we go. Now we've just affected the backdrop. Also, on the light here, I want to blur things out just a little bit by taking the spread up to 0.05. That'll just blur the borders, maybe even a little bit less, 0.025. It'll just blur the borders a little bit and make everything feel softer. You don't need a lot. I'm probably going to do this 0.015. And then once we have our light where we want it, I take it all the way down, and let's just highlight an area over here like that. And I'll bring it up ever so slightly until it has just a little bit of an effect right there. I keep on going, and that's all we need. We just need a little something to bring in texture to the backdrop. And if I go too bright with this, it's going to make it difficult to have the swan stand out in front of it. So that's all we really need right there for the backdrop. Now for the swan, I've set up an area light that's fairly similar to what we did with the backdrop. It has a gobo. I also light linked it so it's not affecting the backdrop. But what I'd like to do with this is create a null and have it always looking at the swan. No matter where I move it in the viewports, I want it to always look at the swan. Make a null. We'll call this our swan key aim, and we'll call our lights our swan key. And then to get the light to always look at the null, we go up here to constraints, look at, highlight the null, and then press enter twice in our viewport. And now whenever I move this around, let's say I have this guy, it always looks at that null. So that's the first thing. The other thing that's going to be important to do is make a scene material override so I can really tell where this light is hitting. Because right now, if I shine the light, it's going to be difficult to see where this is happening on the ice. So going to the out context, I'll go to the redshift ROP here, and under the main tab, we should have a scene material override right here. I'll then go to the material context, RS material builder, and I'm going to create a darker shader so it's easy to tell where this is all hitting. So we have that darker shader. We'll call this our dark material. And then here on the out, I can then select that dark material. Now when I hit play, we can really see where this is all happening. And I'll just move this over so that we can see this all a bit better here as well. There we go. So we have that. Again, on our area lights, let's try turning down the spread. So if I turn that down to 0 and I begin turning up the exposure, eventually we can see all that detail and we know exactly where this is hitting. With that information, I'm going to mess around with the light settings until we have something that looks decent for our swan. The first thing I'll do is bring up the size a bit so that we cover this whole thing. So let's take the size to about 3 or so. And then as I move this around, I want to take a look again at the silhouettes and the areas that I'm hitting along the swan. If I want to put an emphasis on the face as an example, I need to create some kind of way of highlighting that face or just bringing attention to that one spot. So as an example, I'm going to bring this up, and you'll notice that along the head I have a bright area and a dark area. It's wrapping around and it's causing the attention to go more so to that zone because it has changing values. That's exactly the kind of thing that I want. So let's say that I have this and I go to our out context again. I'm happy with where everything is landing, and I turn off the override scene materials. I'm going to save this right here, and we're going to do it before and after. Okay, so a few interesting things have happened here. This is the scene material override. This is what happens when we bring all of our material back. And then this is what happens when we turn off the key light altogether for the swan. So we went from here to here. And again, this is where we aimed all of our lighting. This is why shading transparent objects is fairly difficult. For one, we have the brighter areas along the face here. We don't see that along here. Not really. We can kind of tell that the body is a bit brighter right there, but, well, this is darker along the wing and along here, and it's not really happening as much along here. We still do have some brighter highlights, but it all feels fairly random compared to what we aimed for in this scene material override. When we stop to think about what just happened though, it all makes sense. We are lighting a transparent object. So in the real world, what happens to that light? It goes through the object. It bends the light a little bit. It comes out the other side. And again, what is a transparent object? It's mostly what we see behind it and its highlights. It's reflected light of something bouncing off. Fun fact, the other reason why this is really different is because the backdrop here got illuminated. It got lit up a lot by our swan. And even though we have our light mesh associations on, this light that we see right here is actually the reflection that's coming from the swan. The area light is not lighting the backdrop. What we see right here is simply reflecting off of the swan and hitting this area. So our swan, in a way, is kind of acting like a light in itself because it's reflecting our area light. So lighting transparent objects is not only difficult to control for the object itself, but it's also difficult to control because, again, those reflections will go and affect everything else. So naturally, this begs the question, okay, well, how do we go about this? Because this is difficult to control when we have this going on, and you just have a hard time controlling the backdrop and the main object because everything's bouncing around in a way that, again, is difficult to control. Well, the first thing we need to do is take back control over our scene by turning down the lights and by, again, going back to what worked before when separating the swan from the backdrop. Let me show you what I mean. Again, we need to take control back in our scene. So what I'm going to do on the swan key is turn that off. And then on our HDRI swan, I'm going to turn that down to a value of 2 on the exposure so that I darken the swan and I leave a little bit of room for those highlights to come in eventually from the key light. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, so this is, again, no key light. We turn down the HDRI on the swan. This feels a bit dark, but we're going to lighten this up again with our key. So then on the swan key, if I turn this on, now we're back in business. This isn't so bad. I'm also going to turn down the exposure though a tad bit. So instead of 5.5, let's try a value of 4 because we're getting a little bit too bright in areas like this. And now, all of a sudden, we still have the separation between the backdrop and the swan, but we are in control again. And that's one of the most important things. The next thing I want to do is make it easier for the swan to pick up a highlight that's coming from our area lights. Now, I can try to increase the roughness on the swan, and that'll turn it into a frosted glass looking thing or a frosted ice. But if we don't want a frosted ice, that kind of leaves us with a problem. How can we actually do that? Well, it turns out that the spread parameter on our light can either make it easier or more difficult for a highlight to get picked up on our object. Let me offer a highly sophisticated illustration to show this process. Right now we have a spread of 0. So all these light rays are, you can imagine, going in a more straight angle. But when we turn up the spread, it's also going to send out light rays like this. And it's going to soften all the different directions that are able to pick up a highlight. So maybe I have something up here that's sending a, let's say, diagonal ray over here to the ice. And now because of that, it was a lot easier for a highlight to get picked up along here and sent back to the camera. That's the idea of turning up the spread here on this area light. And it's going to allow us to hit more areas in general without it being as random as it is. I'll go over here, turn up the spread to 1. And we also need to turn up the exposure a little bit. So I'll turn this up to a value of 5. Let's see a before and after, and then we'll assess what's happening from there. Okay, so we have this. I'll turn up the exposure even more. Let's say a value of 6 now. And something interesting is beginning to happen. Notice how it's brighter along here. It's brighter along the head. These are the areas that we were aiming for. If we compare this and that, all of a sudden we've brought back that directionality that we originally had right here. See how this is bright and see how that got bright too? That's all because it was able to find an area along our area light to reflect back to our eyes. There's one more important thing that I like to do in order to make this ice really stand out, and that is increase the mid-tone contrast using a LUT. So if I go here and I have this contrasted LUT, take a look at before and after. Anytime you emphasize the difference between a highlight and a dark area, you're going to take that ice or that transparent object and make it pop. Any areas that have dark light are going to catch the eye and stand out compared to everything else around it. Now for the grand finale, I want to compare before and after. This is before, this is after. For more tips and tricks, check out cgforge.com. Thanks for watching and have a great day.